Ethan walked briskly down the crowded street, his expensive coat shielding him from the bitter cold. His polished shoes tapped rhythmically against the pavement, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the bustling city around him. His mind was occupied with numbers, deals, and deadlines. He didn't notice the people he passed by, faces blurred together, nameless, insignificant. That was his world now. Cold, efficient, detached. Just as he was about to cross the street, he heard a faint voice. Weak, trembling, almost lost in the noise. "Spare some change, please. God bless you." He hesitated, his steps faltering. It was an old woman, huddled on the sidewalk, her frail body wrapped in layers of tattered clothing. Her hair was gray, tangled, and her face was etched with deep lines of suffering. For a moment, he was tempted to keep walking, to ignore her like everyone else did. But something about her eyes stopped him, tired yet gentle, filled with a familiar warmth. She looked up at him and whispered, "Bless you." Isabella would be so proud. Ethan's heart stopped. He felt the cold air stab through his chest, sharp and painful. How did she know that name? Isabella. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in 23 years. A name he buried along with his heart. His hands trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. Without counting, he handed her a few bills, $3.50. It didn't matter. He just wanted to leave, to escape the ache in his chest. The old woman's eyes widened with gratitude, tears spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. She clutched the money to her chest, whispering, "Thank you. Isabella would be so happy. God bless you." Ethan stood there, frozen, his eyes locked on her. How did she know Isabella? How could she possibly know? Before he could ask, his phone buzzed sharply. A call from his office. He hesitated, glancing back at the old woman who was now whispering a silent prayer. He shook his head, turning away quickly, his heart pounding. It was just a coincidence. Just a poor woman mumbling nonsense. That's all. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the cold feeling creeping up his spine. It felt like he was being watched. He turned back, but she was gone. Only an empty sidewalk remained. A chill ran through him, colder than the winter air. He tightened his coat around himself and walked faster, trying to outrun the memory of Isabella's smile. But her name echoed in his mind, haunting him with every step. Ethan sat alone in his penthouse office, high above the bustling city. The skyline glittered with 1,000 lights, but the world outside felt distant, cold, empty. His desk was spotless, every document perfectly aligned, his laptop gleaming without a single fingerprint. Everything was in its place, everything except his heart. On the corner of his desk, almost hidden behind a stack of files, was a small, faded photograph. Ethan's eyes drifted to it, his fingers trembling as he reached out and picked it up. The picture was old, the colors slightly washed out, but the smiles were still vivid. Isabella's smile, bright and carefree, her dark hair flowing in the wind. And next to her, a younger Ethan, his eyes full of love and hope, a happiness he could barely recognize now. His chest tightened as memories flooded back, sharp and overwhelming. He could still hear her laugh, a melody that used to light up his days. He could still see her eyes sparkling with mischief as they danced under cherry blossoms, petals swirling around them like pink snow. They were inseparable, their love so strong that nothing seemed able to break it. Nothing except death. Ethan closed his eyes, his jaw clenching as the image of twisted metal and shattered glass flashed before him. The phone call that shattered his world. "She's gone. I'm so sorry, there was nothing we could do." He remembered how his knees buckled, how the phone slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor. How his heart shattered into a million pieces, just like the glass that took her away. 23 years. It had been 23 years, but the pain felt just as raw. He could still feel the emptiness, the void she left behind. A hollow ache that never went away. People told him to move on, to let go. But how could he let go when she was his everything? She was his laughter, his joy, his future. And when she died, all of that died with her. That was the day Ethan stopped feeling. He built walls around his heart, brick by brick, until nothing could touch him. He became cold, calculating, ruthless. A man driven by ambition, wealth, and power. Love was a weakness, and he swore never to be weak again. But every year, on the same day, he allowed himself to feel. Just for one day. Every year, he visited her grave, carrying a single white rose. It was their secret, a tradition only he and Isabella knew. White roses were her favorite, a symbol of innocence, of undying love. He would stand there, his heart aching, his voice choked as he whispered to the wind, "I miss you, Isabella. I miss you every day." He never stayed long. Just long enough to feel the cold stone under his fingers, to imagine her warm smile, to remember the life they should have had. And then he would leave, his face hardening once more, the mask of the ruthless businessman slipping back into place. But this year felt different. The old woman's words haunted him, echoing in his mind. Isabella would be so proud. How did she know that name? How could she possibly know? Ethan looked at the photograph again, his fingers brushing against Isabella's face, a tear slipping down his cheek before he could stop it. The walls he built were cracking. The fortress around his heart was crumbling. For the first time in 23 years, he felt something other than pain. He felt curiosity. He felt hope. Could it be possible? Could Isabella still be watching over him? Could she have sent that old woman to remind him of who he once was? Ethan's hands trembled as he placed the photograph back on his desk, his mind swirling with questions, with memories, with emotions he thought he had buried long ago. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the city lights outside, but his heart was somewhere else, under cherry blossoms, laughing with the woman he loved. He didn't know how, but he needed answers. He needed to find that old woman again. For the first time in years, Ethan stood up, his chest tightening with purpose. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he had to look. Because maybe, just maybe, Isabella was still with him. The next morning was cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. Ethan parked his sleek black car outside the cemetery gates, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before releasing a shaky breath. This was his ritual, every year, on the same day, at the same time. 23 years had passed, but the pain was as sharp as ever. The pain of losing Isabella, the woman he loved more than life itself. He stepped out of the car, pulling his coat tighter as the cold wind bit at his face. In his gloved hand, he carried a single white rose, delicate and pure, just like Isabella. It was his way of remembering her, the white rose she had loved so much. The cemetery was quiet, almost hauntingly so. The bare trees stood still, their branches unmoving against the dull sky. As he walked along the familiar path, his footsteps crunching softly on the frozen ground, his mind drifted back to the first time he brought a white rose here, on the day they lowered her into the earth. He could still hear the echoes of sobs, still feel the hollowness in his chest, the world crumbling around him. 23 years, and the wound never healed. Turning the last corner, he froze. Someone was already there. An old woman, kneeling by Isabella's grave, her frail body wrapped in layers of tattered clothing. Her back was hunched, her shoulders trembling slightly. In her hands, she held a bouquet of white roses, the exact same kind Ethan brought every year. His heart skipped a beat. How did she know? He stood there, stunned, his breath visible in the cold air. He watched as she gently placed the roses at the foot of the headstone, her fingers brushing over Isabella's name. Her lips moved in a whisper, too quiet to hear, but he saw the tears that fell, freezing before they reached the ground. Anger bubbled up inside him. Who is she? How did she know Isabella? And how dare she intrude on his private grief? He stormed forward, his voice harsher than he intended. What are you doing here? The woman startled, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment, she looked like a ghost, her pale face and sunken eyes hollow, as if she were a part of this cold, empty place. I was just, her voice was soft, trembling, but there was a warmth in her gaze, a kindness that made his anger falter. Who are you? He demanded. Why are you here? The woman's lips quivered as she lowered her head. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. Her voice broke, her shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. I come here every year, to remember her, to remember Isabella. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his hands going numb. How do you know Isabella? A tear slipped down her cheek as she looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with sorrow. I used to take care of her when she was little. I was her nanny after her parents died. His world tilted. The memories came rushing back, Isabella's stories about the kind woman who looked after her, who braided her hair, who held her when she cried. He never met her. Isabella never spoke her name. But she always said the woman had a heart of gold, a heart bigger than anyone she had ever known. Ethan's voice wavered. You're her. The woman nodded, her face crumpling as she choked back a sob. Yes, and I loved her, like she was my own. His anger dissolved, replaced by a heavy ache in his chest. He looked at the white roses she brought, his vision blurring. You brought white roses? A sad smile touched her lips. She loved them. She said they were a symbol of pure love, just like yours. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. How did she know that? How could she possibly know? He sank to his knees beside her, his heart breaking all over again. I bring them every year. I thought I was the only one. The woman placed a trembling hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle and warm despite the cold. You're not alone, you never were. They sat together in silence, the white roses resting softly on Isabella's grave. The clouds above them finally broke, snowflakes drifting down like petals, delicate and pure, just like the love that refused to die. Ethan sank to his knees beside Margaret, his fingers grazing the cold earth beneath him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled softly through the leafless trees, carrying the scent of winter and the echo of memories long past. His gaze fixed on the white roses lying at the foot of Isabella's headstone. Identical to the one he held, yet somehow more poignant, more meaningful. They were placed with a love as pure and unwavering as his own. Margaret's trembling voice broke the silence. She always loved white roses, said they were a symbol of pure love. Ethan's chest tightened, his breath catching. He turned to look at Margaret, whose frail hands gently touched the petals, as if caressing Isabella's face. She told me once, Margaret continued, her voice soft with nostalgia, that she wanted white roses at her wedding, and at her grave, because love, to her, was pure, beautiful and everlasting. Ethan felt his eyes sting, a burning ache that he had suppressed for over 2 decades. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I didn't know that. Margaret smiled sadly, her eyes distant, lost in memories. She was so full of life, so bright, like sunshine on a cold day. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. And she loved you. Oh, how she loved you. Ethan's heart shattered. He had spent years convincing himself that the pain would fade, that he would forget. But hearing Isabella's love spoken aloud brought everything back, the warmth of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she used to hold his hand, fingers intertwined, as if she would never let go. Margaret looked at him, her eyes soft and kind. She told me you were her forever, that no matter what happened, she would love you until the end of time. Ethan's shoulders trembled, his face crumpling as the tears finally fell. The world around him blurred, the cold wind biting at his cheeks as he wept for the first time in 23 years. I thought she was angry at me, for not being there, for not protecting her. His voice broke, his body shaking with guilt. I thought she died hating me. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. No, Ethan. She never blamed you. Not once. Her voice wavered, heavy with sorrow. The last time I saw her, she told me how lucky she was to have been loved by you. She was happy, even until the end. His head snapped up, disbelief flooding his face. She was happy. Margaret nodded, her eyes wet with tears. Yes, she was in pain, but she was at peace, because she knew you loved her. That was all she ever needed. A choked sob escaped Ethan's lips. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of his grief finally breaking free. I've missed her, every day, every moment, it hurts so much. Margaret reached out, placing a gentle hand on his back. I know. I miss her too. Her voice softened, trembling. She was like my own daughter, the daughter I never had, and I loved her with all my heart. They sat together, two souls bound by a shared love and an unspoken grief. The wind whispered through the branches, a haunting melody that echoed their sorrow. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke, his voice raw and hoarse. Thank you, for loving her, for being there for her when I couldn't. Margaret shook her head, wiping her tears. No. Thank you, for giving her the love she always dreamed of, for being the man she adored. Ethan looked at the white roses, his heart aching. I thought I was alone, all these years. I thought no one remembered her. Margaret's eyes softened. You were never alone, Ethan, and neither was she. Love doesn't end, not with death, not ever. He looked up at her, his vision blurry with tears. You kept your promise, you came here, every year, to bring her white roses. Margaret nodded, her voice breaking. It was all I could do, to honor her memory, to let her know she was loved. She looked down at her trembling hands. This year. I couldn't afford them, and I was so ashamed, but then, you. Ethan's heart clenched, his chest tightening. The money. Margaret smiled through her tears. Yes, you gave me hope, you allowed me to keep my promise, to her, and to myself. He felt his throat tighten, his words choking him. I thought it was just charity, but it was more than that. His voice wavered, his shoulders shaking. It was a gift, from Isabella, through me, to you. A tear slipped down Margaret's cheek, her lips trembling. Yes, it was her love, still alive, through you, and through me. They sat together, surrounded by white roses and fallen snow, mourning and healing together. The love they shared for Isabella intertwined, binding them in a way that was beautiful and bittersweet. And for the first time in 23 years, Ethan felt his heart begin to mend. Ethan looked at Margaret, her frail body trembling in the cold, her eyes still shimmering with tears. A gentle breeze rustled the white roses at Isabella's grave, their petals soft and delicate, as if whispering a silent promise. He took a deep breath, his chest tightening as he gathered the courage to speak. "Margaret, would you come here with me, every year?" Margaret's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. What do you mean?" Ethan's voice trembled. "Isabella loved you, and you loved her, you were family to her, and now, you're family to me." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I don't want to visit her alone anymore. I want to honor her memory, together, with you." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her body shaking as she tried to suppress a sob. Her eyes filled with gratitude, her voice breaking. You would do that, for me?" Ethan's face softened. "No. I would do it, for Isabella, and for us, because she loved us both, and she would want us to heal, together." Margaret's shoulders shook, her frail frame crumbling under the weight of her emotions. She reached out, her fingers curling around Ethan's hand, holding it tight, as if afraid he might disappear. Thank you. I've been so lonely, all these years. I thought I was the only one who remembered her." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I thought so too, but I was wrong. We were never alone. We had each other, even if we didn't know it." They stood together, side by side, facing Isabella's grave. Ethan placed his white rose next to Margaret's bouquet, their flowers entwining, a symbol of love that transcended time and death. A gust of wind blew, swirling the snow around them, a soft whisper echoing through the air. It felt like Isabella's voice, laughing gently, her spirit dancing among the petals. Ethan's heart ached, but this time, it was a gentle pain, a sweet sorrow mixed with love and hope. He looked up at the sky, whispering softly, "Thank you, Isabella, for giving me a family, even after you were gone." Margaret's voice joined his, a fragile whisper. "Thank you, my little angel, for bringing me to him, for showing me that love never dies." They stood in silence, letting the snow fall around them, blanketing the world in white. After a while, Ethan turned to Margaret, his face filled with determination. "You shouldn't be out here, in the cold, without a home, without a family. Come with me. Let me help you, let me give you a place to stay, a warm bed, a second chance at life." Margaret's eyes widened, her lips trembling. I can't. I don't want to be a burden." Ethan shook his head, his voice firm but kind. "You're not a burden, you're family, and family takes care of each other." He took her frail hand in his grip gentle but steady. "You gave Isabella love when she needed it most. Let me give that love back to you. Let me fulfill the promise I made, to never let her be alone." Margaret's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she sobbed, her body shaking. I never thought I would have a home again. I thought I would die alone." Ethan's heart broke, his own tears falling. "You're not alone, not anymore, not ever again." He helped Margaret to her feet, wrapping his coat around her shivering shoulders. She leaned against him, her frail body weak and tired, but her heart overflowing with gratitude and love. Together, they walked away from the grave, their steps slow but steady. The snow fell softly around them, whispering blessings from the heavens. Ethan glanced back one last time, his eyes locking on Isabella's name etched in stone. "I'll keep my promise, to both of you, every year, every day, for the rest of my life." Margaret looked up at him, her eyes filled with admiration. "You're a good man, just like she said, just like she always believed." Ethan's throat tightened, his chest aching. "I'm only good, because she taught me how to love, because she gave me her heart, and she gave me you." Margaret's lips curled into a soft smile, her face glowing with peace. "Then let's keep her love alive, together." They walked away, hand in hand, two souls connected by the love of the one they lost. Behind them, the white roses swayed gently in the breeze, their petals dancing in the snow, as if Isabella herself was smiling, watching over them with love that was pure, beautiful, and everlasting. Snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the world in a gentle, quiet white. Ethan walked alongside Margaret, supporting her frail body as they made their way back to his car. As they reached the car, Ethan opened the door, helping her settle in the passenger seat, wrapping his scarf around her to keep her warm. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be cared for again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought my life would end alone, in the cold." Ethan's heart tightened, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He took her hand in his eyes fierce with determination. "Not anymore. You're not alone anymore. From now on, we're family." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "Family. I haven't heard that word in so long." She looked down at her trembling hands, her lips quivering. "Thank you for giving me a place to belong." Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice soft but firm. "No. Thank you for loving Isabella, and for showing me that love never dies." As they drove away from the cemetery, Ethan's heart felt lighter, a warmth spreading through him. For the first time in 23 years, he didn't feel empty. He felt connected to Isabella, to Margaret, and to a future he never thought possible. Snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the world in a gentle, quiet white. Ethan walked alongside Margaret, supporting her frail body as they made their way back to his car. As they reached the car, Ethan opened the door, helping her settle in the passenger seat, wrapping his scarf around her to keep her warm. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be cared for again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought my life would end alone, in the cold." Ethan's heart tightened, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He took her hand in his eyes fierce with determination. "Not anymore. You're not alone anymore. From now on, we're family." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "Family. I haven't heard that word in so long." She looked down at her trembling hands, her lips quivering. "Thank you for giving me a place to belong." Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice soft but firm. "No. Thank you for loving Isabella, and for showing me that love never dies." As they drove away from the cemetery, Ethan's heart felt lighter, a warmth spreading through him. For the first time in 23 years, he didn't feel empty. He felt connected to Isabella, to Margaret, and to a future he never thought possible. Months passed, and true to his promise, Ethan took Margaret into his home. He provided her with warmth, comfort, and care, but most importantly, he gave her a sense of belonging. Together, they shared stories of Isabella, filling the house with laughter, tears, and memories that kept her spirit alive. They became a family, bound not by blood but by love. Inspired by Margaret's devotion and Isabella's kindness, Ethan decided to honor Isabella's memory in a way that would keep her love alive forever. He founded the Isabella Foundation, dedicated to helping the homeless, providing shelter, food, and hope to those who had lost their way, just as Margaret once had. Margaret became the heart of the foundation, sharing her story, comforting those in need, and helping them rebuild their lives. She gave them hope, just as Isabella had given her. Ethan watched her with admiration, his heart swelling with pride. Isabella's love was still changing lives, still healing hearts, even from beyond the grave. The foundation flourished, growing beyond his wildest dreams. It became a symbol of love, compassion, and humanity, a legacy of Isabella's pure heart. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Isabella's death, Ethan and Margaret returned to the cemetery, just as they had promised. The sky was clear, a bright blue canvas painted with sunlight. The snow had melted, replaced by blooming flowers and fresh grass. Together, they stood before Isabella's grave, each holding a white rose. Their hands touched as they placed the roses side by side, the petals mingling in the gentle breeze. Ethan looked at Margaret, his eyes reflecting warmth and gratitude. "I never thought I'd be able to smile again, standing here." Margaret's face softened, her wrinkles creasing into a tender smile. "It's because of her love, it brought us together." Ethan's eyes shimmered with tears. "Yes, even now, she's still teaching me how to love." They stood in silence, the wind whispering around them, carrying Isabella's spirit in its embrace. It felt like she was there, standing between them, smiling with joy. Margaret knelt down, her fingers brushing the cold stone. "Thank you, Isabella, for giving me a son, for giving me a family, even after you were gone." Ethan's chest tightened, his heart aching. He whispered softly, "I love you. I always will, and I promise to keep your love alive, every day, for the rest of my life." They stood together, united by the woman they both loved, the woman who changed their lives forever. The sun shone down on them, warm and bright, illuminating the white roses that danced in the breeze. It felt like a blessing, a message from Isabella herself, one of peace, love, and gratitude. Ethan reached out, taking Margaret's hand. "Let's go, we have a lot of work to do, for the foundation, for Isabella." Margaret nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Yes, for Isabella, and for all the people who need love." Together, they walked away, their hearts intertwined, their souls connected by a love that was pure, beautiful, and everlasting. Behind them, the white roses glowed under the golden sun, their petals softly shimmering, as if Isabella herself was smiling, watching over them, always. Ethan stood at the window of his office, looking out over the cityscape bathed in golden sunlight. In his hands, he held a white rose, its petals delicate and pure. He smiled softly, his heart warm, his mind filled with memories of Isabella. But for the first time in 23 years, the pain was gone, replaced by peace. Behind him, on his desk, a framed photograph captured a new memory, Margaret laughing, surrounded by children at the Isabella Foundation, her face radiant with joy and purpose. Ethan looked at the rose, his fingers gently tracing its soft petals. Love never dies, it only changes form, it lives on in those we touch, in the lives we change. His phone buzzed, a message from Margaret, heading to the shelter now. "You coming?" He typed back quickly, "On my way. Let's keep her love alive." As he left his office, his heart was light, his steps filled with purpose. Isabella's love was still here, still alive, and it always would be, through him, through Margaret, and through every soul they helped. Love has the power to transcend time, death, and distance. It connects us in ways we never imagined. Ethan thought he had lost everything, but through a simple act of kindness, he found a family, a purpose, and a love that would never die. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create the most powerful ripples. They can heal wounds, bridge distances, and bring people together. Just like they did for Ethan and Margaret. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love and compassion, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep the spirit of love alive by helping one another, just as Isabella did. What about you? Have you ever experienced a moment where love or kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else to believe in the power of love. Thank you for watching. If you were touched by this story, consider subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the beauty of humanity. Let's spread love, one story at a time.